Hey everyone, welcome to Indie Film Grit, a podcast about indie films and indie filmmakers. I am your host, Timothy Patrick, but you can call me Tim. In this episode, I got a chance to talk with two first-time filmmakers, Marcus Scott and Heath Hetherington, who together co-wrote and co-directed a new feature film called Recovery. It's a thriller, and it's available on Vimeo on demand starting October 13th. Let's get into it. And here we are with Heath Hetherington and Marcus Scott. How are you guys? Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us. We're really good.
Yeah, really good. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Now you guys made a film called Recovery, and in July, it was at the Miami Film Festival?
Yeah, that's correct. So it was actually the first film festival that we got accepted to. So back in July, and then from there, it's been picked up at a couple of other film festivals, and it's received a few other awards.
That's great. It's a feature film, and it's a thriller.
Yeah, well, we initially wrote it as a horror, but then as we were going through it, we wanted to give a bit more depth to the villain or antagonist. So as we added more in, it sort of became more dramatic, and then sort of moved from a horror to a thriller.
Is this your first film?
Yeah, it's both of us. It's the first film that we've created. I've done, just to confirm as well, I'm Marcus Scott, the other voice was Heath Hetherington. I've worked on sort of little bits, independent stuff, just sort of run ad, sound, very low-level things. So this is the first time I've done anything like directing. Not even a short before this. This is Heath's first project of any kind within the film world. Mm-hmm. We actually had the idea, the way it came about that we made this was I've always wanted to work in film, and we met up in January of 2016, and I just suggested the idea to Heath. Over the next couple of hours, we'd met in a bar, we had a few drinks, and then just from there, based on a sort of one-line, log line, somebody goes out drinking, passes out, and is kidnapped. We developed that into the basis of the film that we've created now.
Now, I have never co-written or co-directed. What was that experience like for you guys?
So, well, the writing part of it was fairly simple. Essentially, Marcus wrote the sort of meat of it initially. So he came to me with, I think at that point that we had about 40 pages, mm-hmm. And very stock standard dialogue and that sort of thing. And then I went through it, I think we should add things in here. We should change this dialogue. We should do that. I think the film should go in this direction. And then, so it was more of a back and forth of he would send me what he thought, I would send him what I thought, and then we'd sort of meet in the middle for the most part. With the directing side of things, there wasn't as sort of clear a plan with it. Mm-hmm. So what we sort of ended up doing was that sort of in the more character type parts, Marcus took over that. Anything that involved any sort of like the fight scenes or any sort of blood effects or anything like that, I took over the directing on those. There were a few sort of back and forths where I did some dialogue scenes, but for the most part, that's how it went.
That's a good way to split it up. Divide and conquer.
Yep. Yeah, there were parts as well where it was a case of that Marcus had to because we didn't have runners, we didn't have a particularly big crew. You know, Marcus might have had to run off to do something, so not to stop the shoot, I would take over.
You guys were nice enough to send me the film, and I got to check it out. What struck me is the smart use of locations. A lot of it takes place in the same spot, which, you know, like Reservoir Dogs, it'll save you a lot of money and setups and all that. Did you guys build that into the script?
So in regards to the locations, yeah, it was built into the script. We were looking for one location to do the sort of basement and the house parts. And we actually got very lucky with one of Marcus's friends who let us take over his house for a week.
Very nice.
So, yeah. So it was very interesting. He would go off to work and we'd turn up and do our shooting, and then he'd come home and we'd have these actors filing out the place, and we'd be packing up all the equipment and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to the bar scenes and the party scene's actually shot in my flat, and the bar scenes downstairs are actually shot in the pub that I lived above.
Oh.
So I knew the owner pretty well, so I got permission to shoot in the bar before it opened.
Mm-hmm.
In the morning. So it was all in the script beforehand that we were going to shoot in the bar and have that sort of party location.
Wow.
And with the basement, yeah, it was definitely just it was lucky that we got that location as well.
Now, if you're living above a pub, how much of this story is autobiographical?
Not that much.
Well, thankfully.
I very rarely had trouble making it home from said pub.
Right.
It was normally just up a flight of stairs, so there's not a lot that can go wrong in that sort of scenario.
Now, your production company is OBD Films. Can you let the people know what that stands for?
It stands for Orphaned by Dingoes, which is a reference to Heath's Australian heritage.
So, you're scheduled for October release. Is that still on? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, so we're scheduled for release on the 13th of October. So it's a couple weeks before Halloween. We're looking to sort of capitalize on that. Even though it is a thriller, we think we've got good potential to get some viewers who are looking for like a scary or thrilling film to watch on Halloween. So that's why we've picked October the 13th to be the release date.
Great. I must say, I really enjoyed the acting in this film. You got some great actors. How'd you go about finding them?
Well, it's interesting. The way that we found most of the actors was through just hiring online. What was the website called again, Heath?
Film and TV Pro.
Film and TV Pro. So we just put adverts out looking for people who just wanted experience in a feature-length film. The amount of replies that we got for the majority of roles, any role that could be had by somebody who was young would just be flooded with applicants for it. So the main character, Philip, we had quite a few for that. Shelley, the woman that he flirts with in the house party scenes at the beginning, we had a few applicants for that. And the way that we found Philip was just through these online applications. Adam Crane, who's the actor who plays Philip, he was by far the best person that applied for the Philip role online. And after a few auditions, it became clear that he was the person that we wanted. And luckily, scheduling didn't conflict, so we got him. And the way that we got AJ, who plays Wayne, the villain in the film, we actually approached him online as well through Casting Call Pro. Sent him the script. He did a Skype interview with us, read a couple of scenes. He really got the balance we thought right between sympathetic enough for the audience to relate to him, but also menacing enough to be a authentic threat for the main characters. So he was bringing that balance to the role that other people would sort of go too far in the direction of being menacing. That was the main problem. We had people on who would play it as sort of a campy or cardboard villain, but AJ really did nail that part.
Yeah, I thought he was great. I thought they were all great. I also enjoyed some of the camera angles. Some of the setups were interesting, the framing. Did you two make those decisions, or your DP?
Yeah, so with the working with Rob, the cinematographer, he did take the lead on some of the shots. There were shots that we particularly wanted in the film. We were sort of very, tight for time and stuff like that. A lot of the time we were like, okay, how can we get this done as quickly as possible? Because a lot of the time with the more sort of tricky shots, those took a lot of time. And one of the things that was probably most frustrating for me was the shot at the beginning of the film where he's laying down and then the camera sort of pulls out. Essentially for the most part of the first day was trying to get that right, and then in the morning on the second day, also getting that right. What actually ended up in the film was a fixed still shot, and it was actually the zoom out was done in post.
Very nice.
For me, that I found that completely infuriating, to be perfectly honest. Because we essentially lost a whole day to a shot that we didn't end up using. So, but so a lot of it was trying to work with him as best we could to actually get some more interesting shots in the film. But because of time constraints and that sort of thing, a lot of it was also just very standard shots.
Yeah. I mean, 2 days to get a shot you're not going to use. And then you said you spent a week in the house. So how long was the whole shoot altogether?
The whole shoot was 10 days. So
wow.
The most part of it was was shot in the house in the basement and that sort of thing. So that was a straight through 7 days, and then the house party scenes and the bar scenes, that took us 3 days to shoot. In fact, with the bar scenes and the house party scenes, as I said, because I'm above a pub, a lot of them were just half days, in fact, because at 12:30 when the pub would open, they'd start playing music. And obviously, if you're shooting a film, you can't have that sort of music in the background. So a lot of the time we'd have to sort of wrap up halfway through the day. So looking back on it, in the house, we had a lot more wiggle room than we did with the party scenes and the bar scenes. And I think it was good the order that we did it in, because by the time we got to the house and the party and the bar scenes, by the time we got there, we'd sort of worked out how each of us works together, and so things were running a lot more smoothly. We were able to get things set up, get things done, and get it through as quickly as we could. So yeah, it was the last day was really good, because that last day was down in the pub. We'd shot a whole bunch of it. We had Adam drinking the beers, their actual beers that he's drinking, and then essentially when we finished the scene, we'd get a new beer. Once we finished the take, we'd get him a new beer, and whoever else was on the set would drink the rest of the beer. So by the time we finished it, we were about ready to go out for a few more drinks. So it was a good last day.
Yeah, well, 10 days, that's pretty impressive for a feature length. I got to give you guys props.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was incredibly stressful though. I've probably never in my life been under that much stress to get things done and make sure things were finished, and make sure we've got all the shots. And after we finished it, we said we'd never do anything that short again. Like we'd never try and do a feature on 10 days again, because it is everything has to run smoothly. If things aren't running smoothly, it throws everything out, and then you have to actually give up on things.
The film itself is driven by a lot of dialogue. What challenges did you face in shooting those scenes with the actors?
Well, I think the thing with dialogue scenes, which is the difficulty with any kind of independent film, is just making sure that they flow well, and that you're not just using sort of stationary shot, reverse shot kind of things constantly. So a lot of things that we tried to do with the film was trying to use sort of the way that where the characters were in relation to each other to signify where they were in sort of the power balance between the two. Like we tried to use the location as in a symbolic way as much as possible as well, because the film is a journey. So Philip, our main character, it's him learning how he can escape sort of the nightmare that he's got, waking up in this basement, how he can get out. And it's Wayne, the antagonist, the villain character. It's his sort of moral reckoning with whether what he's doing is correct. So as the dialogue scenes go forwards, sort of Philip becomes he's like shot from below a lot more. At the beginning, he's shot from down to indicate his powerlessness. Later on, he's shot from below facing up to show that he's sort of increased dominance throughout the film. So that was kind of one of the challenges that we had, just making it interesting and that it wasn't just level shot on level shot.
Right.
Obviously, it's visual medium. You want because I think with independent films, there's obviously always the idea that you could possibly, just end up with two people talking to each other and it's not visually stimulating. So that was kind of the thing that we were trying to combat with the film. And I think we did it relatively well. I think there is a lot of visual stuff in there.
The music is fairly subtle, but it plays a fairly big part, at least in the storytelling for me when I watched it. How was that process? Did you work with a music composer, or how'd you get the music going? He was someone who came on very late in the film, Jack Ferran. We got him after all of the shooting was done and the editing was done. We had the sound. The sound hadn't been finished yet. It was all in-camera audio at this point when we got Jack on board. And we got him and Stuart, who also has a role in the film, and he is also the sound editor, and he did sound on the film itself. So we all sat down and discussed how we get the sound to go with the score. And it was then a few months process where we would get different pieces of score against the film. We would play. There was a lot of trying different things, seeing what worked. Some of it was more, some of the earlier ones were subtler than what's in the film. Some of it went more towards being sort of a standard horror score. So it was a lot of the score process was refining it into what it is, where I think it's more character based. With horror films, I think a lot of it's to try and get scares. I think with Recovery, it's more to sort of chart the emotional landscape of what's happening more than just to scare the audience. You already impressed me with the 10-day shoot. How long did the editing process take altogether?
Much longer.
Yeah. So with the editing, we got Ben, who actually works as a sort of commercial editor. So he does television commercials. He also does like training videos and whatnot. And he really wants to get into film rather than commercial work. So he took it on. the issue that we had there was that he was only working on it sort of on weekends and in spare time and that sort of thing. So it did take an incredibly long time for it to actually be edited. A lot of the time spent was he would send something to us. He'd do, say, 20 minutes of the film. He'd send it to us. Marcus and I'd meet up, go through it, make notes, send it back. He'd make changes, send it back, that sort of thing. We actually, so it was all done remotely, which I think is potentially what made it a lot longer than it needed to be, because we then, once he'd sort of done the full film, he then came up to my house up in Leeds, and we just sat down and went through the film. And the amount of work that we got done on that day, as compared to the back and forth that we had, was just phenomenal. Like I would, if I was to do it again, I would definitely be in that room straight away. This is what we want to do, and then maybe do the back and forth. But I think it's one of those things where you just learn from doing it.
No, of course. It's a big part of filmmaking, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, yeah, I've learned, well, I've never sort of really done anything particular with films, and the amount of stuff that I've learned through this process about, filming and editing. Like I now edit videos and that sort of thing, which I'd never done before. And sound design and sound mixing, all these things that I've sort of I've now become interested in and now do more as a hobby, is just, it's amazing. I think at the moment, with how easy it is to get programs to do different things, doing your sound design, doing your editing, all that sort of thing, most of them are freely available. I use HitFilm for editing. And the amount of like online tutorials and stuff like that is just amazing, the wealth of knowledge that is out there. And you can just sort of self-teach yourself these things, and then use that to sort of create your own content, which I think you sort of in this sort of age we're living in, like there is so much opportunity for you just to create content. Whether it be good or bad or whatever, you can just get it out there so easily, and I don't think that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we would have even gotten close to making recovery. But with digital filming and even like decent internet and emails and stuff like that has made it a hell of a lot easier to sort of make films like Recovery. And I think it's something that people sort of also need to realize a bit, is that you can just get out there and make your own things. You don't have to sort of it's not one of those things where you sort of have to wait for someone to give you permission to do it. You just get out there. You find people on the internet or whatever, who are also interested in filmmaking and that sort of thing, and then they help you out. They bring their experience, and you sort of learn together. You create great things.
Another thing that can only really be done now, as Heath was saying, sort of innovations in the last 10 years, it is being sold through Vimeo. So it's $3.99 to buy now. If you pre-order it before it comes out using the code on the website. Afterwards, it's $4.99. All profits will be shared with actors and crew to make up for the obviously work they've put into it. And that obviously would have just been, that would have been impossible like any time before the last couple of years. Really, we're not relying on a producer to pick it up and put it in the cinemas. We're not relying on a TV or a DVD deal. It's all straight dealing with ourselves.
Yeah, Vimeo on demand is great. I'm a big fan of Vimeo.
Yeah, it's just opened it up so much to be in the hands of the content creators rather than the people who, it's so much in the hands of directors now rather than producers and big production companies. We think it's a great innovation.
you definitely pulled it off for first-time filmmakers. And there's a lot of guys that are going to listen to this and be inspired to take the risk and make their own film. What have you guys learned? If there was like one thing each, maybe that you could impart on these people, what advice could you give?
Well, I've got one actually related to locations. It's kind of a small one, but I think it goes to like a bigger theme. So I think what I'd recommend for anyone who's shooting in a location, we were kind of lucky because it was sort of a friend's house, so we could get away with more. I would say no matter what location it is, take a lot of photos on like your phone, or like Polaroid camera, whatever you've got, something where you can save the photos beforehand, so you know how to put it back together exactly as it looked sort of at the beginning. Because sort of one of the things we did with this was obviously there's some violent scenes in it, things get sort of pushed around a lot. So after we'd filmed it, we sort of left the location not as it was at the beginning, and so a lot of work that we had. So we didn't we could have treated the sort of house we're in better, and sort of afterwards we probably could have done that better with just to kind of smooth relations with the owner of the house. So I'd say definitely with your locations, make sure that you're able to put them back as they were at the beginning. It's sort of a little one, but an important one, especially if you might need to do reshoots later on. Luckily, we didn't, but keep everyone happy and chipping away. Stuff that's free to do, like just making sure everything's tidy and as it was before with locations.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I think for me, probably you can never do too much planning. With recovery, I one of the things was that we got there in the basement. There was actually a large window in there, but it was covered by a bookcase. So when we took the bookcase out, there was obviously this large window, which would create a bit of a why don't they just get out the window type scenario.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, so then what that ended up meaning was we had to go down to the local hardware store. I had to buy some plasterboard and essentially create a new wall. Had I sort of had a bit more time to plan, had a bit more time to think about it, there is something to be said about making sure that things work, making sure that the location is right, making sure that the lighting's right, and all these sort of things. Because as soon as you go to set something up and it doesn't work, that's going to eat into your time. And if you can do as much as you possibly can before you get on set to make sure everything is working, that is time that is not wasted.
Well, Heath, Marcus, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for having us. It was a really good conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and we look forward to promoting further films on here.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing your later films and how the filmmaking career progresses.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's that. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Indie Film Grit podcast. Feel free to check out the show notes at indiefilmgrit.com. Follow us on Twitter at indiefilmgrit, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Well, I should really wrap this up, but before I go, let me ask you something. Do you have the courage, the passion, and the perseverance to make indie films? Do you have enough indie film grit?